مش بدي بدأ الدرس أو sorry I can't أحكي معك هلا هسوي 3 مش 4 okay.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Last time we were doing Surah Nisa, and of course, we were doing ayah number 57 and 58. And we went in details with ayah 57 and 58 simply because of the hadith that, well, when we were talking about dhillan dhalila, and we went into details about what and why it was speaking to us about the different shades. So this is right there in where that type of repetition, that's actually in Lughah Arabiya, where it takes us into that recognition that this is to emphasize this particular shade, that it is a shade upon shade upon shade, and therefore this would be not a repetition for the sake of repetition, but so assalamu alaikum. Sorry about that. I'm gonna do this again. So assalamu alaikum. We are Surah An-Nisa, ayah 57 and 58. This is where we left off at yesterday. Anyhow, so we talked about the word dhil and dalila, and we said that it was shade upon shade. That is to emphasize that piece of it. And we also went in details in regards, well, who is going to be worth of that shade? So we mentioned that by emphasizing that a hadith, سَبْعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ, and we went in details which with each and every single one of these categories. And most importantly, that question that many times people would ask, or girls would ask, well, is this including women as well? So the question or the answer is certainly it's including women as well. So let's continue right there. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا. And we talked about what a trust is, and we basically summarized it and said a trust is basically one, the trust, the relationship, the principle between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also said, number two, the trust is basically this this covenant between you and people as well. So whether we're speaking about the relationship between you and a person in a business transaction, or whether they trusted you on their privacy, or they trusted you or held you liable for certain matters that basically you are liable for. So in that situation, that's a trust. And there are certain trusts that are not necessarily a particular agreement that was done in where it would be known within the culture. So this is al-ma'ruf 'urfan kal-mashruti shartan. There are certain things that people would know. It's a common culture. People would know about that between themselves, and therefore in that situation, even if there wasn't a particular straightforward agreement, it would still be within the known transactions or the known process between people. In other words, it's the uncommunicated, the untold or uncommunicated communication, if you would want to say. I know that sounds like an oxymoron right there, uncommunicated communication, the untold communication, let's say it that way. Can you actually do that? All right. So so there are certain things that are basically ma'rufa. So, and we did go in detail, and we said that for al-amana, trust, we went into the English translation as well to look at what the word trust means, and of course what it relates to. And we went in details with the word trust, and we said that it is really similar to what the word trust actually means in English. So in English, we looked it up, and we said that it was a firm belief in reliability. Let's go look into it right there. And we said it is equivalent. So here we go, equivalent to these two: firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something. And we said that is basically also mentioned even by the different scholars in Islam. So this would be a literal meaning. And then there would be in the fiqh of transactions an arrangement whereby a person or trustee holds property as its nominal owner for the good of one or more beneficiaries. So we did also mention this, and we said this is also in fiqh of transactions. And we also went in details about some fiqh of transactions, whether we were talking about property, basically loans, mortgage, and certainly different corporations and so forth. At the end of the day, to be in trust in any of these transactions actually means you live up to the one, whether it's a service that you're supposed to be doing, two, or whether it's preserving property or preserving wealth or preserving what you were, if it's a service. All right, so basically it's a partnership in putting in a certain service. All right, so in that situation, that would be like a mudaraba. So in that situation, you would be trusted to perform a certain service in a certain way, at least at a high level of professionalism. So that would be part of the amana. We also talked about another type of amana in where it doesn't mean that it's necessarily exclusive to property. And we said that would be an amana to a service where it's a public service. So whether you are probably a teacher or probably a figure in the government or a figure probably in a particular office, you do a certain service, that would be a trust. How much you spend time in there, what kind of service they're asking you to do, and how it is done, and the list goes on and on. This is an amana. This is an amana. Same thing if we're talking about a trust that you are given. So probably that you're supposed to study these. Let's say you're a student, this is what you have to study. Or let's say you are a teacher, this is the curriculum that you have to complete. This is what you have to look into. Your duty as a teacher is to make sure that the students understand, is to basically teach the lesson, make sure that all the children or all the students' needs are met in terms of understanding the lesson. And certainly the testing, you're being fair and so forth. And of course, it's really important to mention, same thing if your mother is trusting you to take care of your brother or take care of your sister, then in that situation, there's also the untold part. Even if your mother didn't tell you take care of your brother or your sister, you already have to have a trust that you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding you accountable and responsible anyways. So this is the untold communication. All right. So in that situation, تؤدوا الأمانات إلى أهلها, it's also to be in responsibility, Now, the other part of it, وإذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل. But I thought, تؤدوا الأمانات, anyways, that الأمانة, part of it is to be in a position of trust. And we mentioned part of it as الإمام العادل. So why is it again, إذا حكمتم? إذا حكمتم means if you rule. So this is basically now exclusive to a person in a specific position of authority, in a specific place of power, or they're at least granted some level of authority that their words are heard. Okay, so whether that's a sheikh, or whether that's a masjid, an imam masjid, or whether that's a family member that has a voice that people would listen to, people would hear. In that situation, إذا حكمتم بين الناس أن تحكموا بالعدل, in where it's emphasizing that if you are in a position to lead, to judge, to basically rule on any matter that you are supposed to judge in justice. So I actually went and a good article, and I basically make it easy and actually find those articles that would take me and make the story short, and I'll emphasize it and basically make it easy for us. Oh, sorry, I wasn't actually sharing the screen and what we're talking about. So this is where al-amanat, and we talked about al-amanat, and right now إذا حكمتم بين الناس. So حكمتم means to rule بين الناس, between people, that you would تحكموا. So the word حكم in حكم actually means to rule, and that's the same thing even in Hebrew. حكم means to rule. أن تحكموا بالعدل, so it's a Semitic word. بالعدل is in justice. So the question is, what is justice? Well, went to this, you could see, they've got some good articles, not always the most the best articles. Sometimes they're just oversimplified, but I thought it was actually a good article for today. All right, so we've got a number of different ayat in where, of course, when you're looking at, let's see, I'm going to take you every time I have to know exactly what screen I'm sharing. So let's see. I've got this website, and this website, they have good articles, but sometimes, to oversimplify. But I thought it would do good in service for now in where what is adl. So adl, justice. Well, what is justice? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said right there, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَةِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا, which is really the ayah that we're doing, Surah An-Nisa, ayah 58. And in other ayat, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ, that the Lord Almighty orders that people would abide by justice and even ihsan. So we've got, here it is again, emphasizing the importance of acting in justice. And in another ayah, وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعَدِلُوا, and if you are to say anything, then make sure you are saying the matters based upon justice. So of course, when you are speaking about amr, so here ordering for justice, two, ruling in justice, and here saying what is justice. So in other words, whether you are acting in a position of being, I guess, a government official, or even an official person, even within the community, or if you had the power to really give an order and there's an enforcement, or whether you are asked your opinion in regards to a dispute between people, then in that situation, you have to say what is justice or what is just. وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ بِالْعَدْلِ. And even if you are to document any rule, that it must be done in justice. So we've got those different corners here. We're talking about, one, ruling; two, giving an order, in other words, having a jurisdiction; three, giving at least the verbal order; and four, the documentation. So everything must be done in justice. So all those different corners. And you could see, of course, that's all these different areas. And by the way, you see how the court is actually designed in where you've got, in the court system, you would have different types of courts. You've got the family court, you've got the court in where that leads to what relates to immigration, you've got the court that is basically for military and so forth. Same thing, all these types of courts are also in Islam. All right, and in fact, this division was first introduced by a scholar. His name is Yaqub ibn Ibrahim, or Abu Yusuf. Abu Yusuf was a student for Abu Hanifa, and he was the first to lay out even the whole idea of having the judge be in a specific attire, the judge be somewhere like at a pedestal, including the position in where there's somebody to document, etc. All of that was actually introduced by Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ibrahim. And it's really sad how never is that mentioned. And of course, there is a deliberate there is a deliberate what is the word that I could use, but a deliberate, there is a deliberate action to totally conceal and hide all the different efforts or good introductions that were done by Muslims. So there, a good book relating to that is basically called House of Wisdom. House of Wisdom. Well, part of his book is actually done horribly, in where he talks about the Prophet ﷺ and Islam as a religion. That was a very horrible chapter that he had done. Jonathan Lyons done a horrible job, at least in that chapter. But the rest of the book, in where he talks about the House of Wisdom, which was in Baghdad, I think he had done an outstanding job. Jonathan Lyons is a professor at Columbia University, had written a number of different books in relationship to Islam, and also that information that was deliberately hidden from how the Western civilization today actually traces back to Al-Andalus, and how, of course, the West is introducing that the modern Western civilization traces back to the Greek, or traces back to the Roman Empire, and not traces back really going through a very important bridge, which is the bridge of the golden era of Islam. All right, so of course, and we know the main reason to that is really for imperialistic reasons. Imperialism, basically, in order to hide the truth of the influences that Muslims had, or at least those that are of color. And that's important because Edward Said emphasized, and actually, I would say, exposed such agenda. There's also another scholar, his name is Mahmoud Mamdani. He also exposed the deliberate I would say, academic writings in trying to conceal the importance, or at least the different works that were done by Muslims, and of course Muslims from different parts of the world. When we're talking about Muslims, we're not talking about Arabs here. We're actually talking about different scholars that were coming from, and of course, most importantly, Iran, which was at the time also under the Sunni rule. It wasn't necessarily under Shia rule. In fact, that was predominantly Sunni. But at the time, it was considered also Asfahan, and Asfahan was considered a very important place. That's actually my dream, to go there, to be honest. And also Maru and Uzbekistan. Those areas were actually considered very important areas. Maru, Uzbek, in certain areas in Uzbekistan, Samarkand, Tirmidh, those were considered as areas that were contributing the most science. So think of it as bringing in, of course, later Al-Andalus, and of course Fas in Morocco as well, Qayrawan in Tunisia were considered the most important places, and later, of course, Al-Azhar in Egypt were considered the most important places for bringing in a contribution in ilm. And believe it or not, it wasn't just knowledge in Islamic studies and fiqh and hadith, but it was also bringing in Islamic or non-Islamic knowledge. So whether we're talking about chemistry, like al-Bayruti, who was actually from Beirut, who was one in chemistry, and also astrophysics. So you had a number of different scholars in mathematicians, physics, chemistry, and astrophysics was something that was always big within the Muslim world. So it would be really important to bring about those studies. One very important figure right now, I think Rania Awad is trying to bring in a number of different scholars in relationship to the psychology and psychiatry in the Muslim world and its contribution to today's studies in psychology and psychiatry. So I think that one is worth mentioning. And of course, even if we're to talk about medical studies, that's a whole different field, whether we're talking about Az-Zahrawi and many, or even Ibn al-Haytham. So it's important to bring those. I think one of my favorite movies, okay, was a movie, I think it's called 1001 Inventions or something like that, summarized it's just in a couple minutes, but didn't I would say somewhere like it's a Disney like a Disney style. What was it? No, 1001 Inventions. I'm talking about a different movie. And it was these students in UK, and they were trying to, of course, each one was assigned to do a certain project, and then these two kids, they're assigned to do a project about the Muslim era and its contribution to science and modern science. And it was found, oh boy, this is boring. And then this wizard, whatever, comes up from, the hidden part of, I guess, the hidden part in the library, and then brings out these different figures to come out in a magical way out of the book in order to introduce themselves and their contribution in surgical procedures, or even in science, or even the astrolabe and even the study of the study of the astrophysics. And I thought, well, it was very impressive. I would like to say, I think one of the most important words, or I would say quotes, that I would like to quote off Jonathan Lyons, which really fascinated me. I never thought about it that way. In his book, The House of Wisdom, he actually talks about why were the Muslims contributing so much in astrophysics in particular. And he was mentioning, so whether it's the astrolabe, yes, the astrolabe was not necessarily introduced by the Muslims. It actually was in the beginning the Greek, and of course that was a very primitive, at least let's call it the basis of that design. And it wasn't until Maryam al-Isturlabiya, she was the one that did further studies and designed it in a more sophisticated and a more well, to be sophisticated, it doesn't mean sophisticated to make it harder, but more intricate. And now to go back to Jonathan Lyons, he was saying that that because the Quran and because Muslims' life depends on 5 daily prayers, and certainly the means of transportation were not easy, and it wasn't easy to figure out the direction for going to the Qibla. So the way to figure out Qibla was, of course, not using the earth and those distances, but by trying to see the reflection in space. So that directed their vision from seeing and looking down to looking up in space to see what they can find in space that can help them figure out time in relationship to their basically rituals, whether we're speaking about prayer, whether we're speaking about Ramadan and the timing of Ramadan, or whether we're speaking about Hajj, or whether we're speaking about Qibla. So he was saying that religion played an important role in helping them understand that in order to understand yourself, you have to first understand who you are, where you're heading, and what you're facing. And that is critical in order to help you understand your position in this life and where you're going. And that led to Muslims going deep in their observation and even in their calculation in space or even place and on earth, and even directions, in other words time as well later on, and so forth. So this was really fascinating. I never thought about it before I was reading Jonathan Leon's book. It was really an eye-opener. It's like, oh, I never thought about that. Sometimes when you read a book and you're like, didn't think about it that way, but that's pretty interesting to put it that way. Anyhow, العدل. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ did actually encourage justice, and in fact, justice is a form of contribution. So when we say anwa' sadaqat, we're talking about contribution when you're acting injustice. And of course, here's a question: do we have to be leaders to rule injustice? Well, a couple of things. Not everyone is capable of being a leader. Leadership is a skill that is not related to faith. In other words, when you look at, for example, Fir'aun, he was a leader, but he was a kafir leader. When you look at certain leaders, why do we also say it's not related to faith? Because you could see that even when Abu Dharr had asked to be a leader, he said, "Istamilni." In other words, appoint me to be a leader on certain places, or at least certain things. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, "Innaka da'if." You're actually weak. This is not talking about weak in terms of how many miles he can walk or etc. This is not talking about physical weakness, but this is actually speaking about the person's capacity, the potentials that the person has, or they are God-given. Okay, so when you're speaking about potential to be able to hold certain responsibilities, it's a skill, it's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, and not everybody is born to be a leader. It's irrelevant to faith. Just like when we talk about Abu Dharr, he was actually the sixth to become Muslim. All right, and you would say Fir'aun was a leader, Abu Lahab was a leader, Hitler was a leader, Netanyahu is a leader, but of course a leader in genocide, a leader in injustice, etc. So, but for those that have the capacity to lead in good, they've got the skill to lead, then that is when they would be held accountable to actually act in such positions and be in such power to implement what is right. So you look at even the Sahaba. If you look at Sahaba, you had Amr ibn al-As, for example. Amr ibn al-As, when he had led the battle of Dhat al-Salasil, he was only 4 months Muslim. He was only 4 months Muslim, but then he was actually leading a whole battle. He was actually put, kind of like what we would say today, he was a high military official. All right. Khalid ibn al-Walid, when he became Muslim, he was already appointed as a high military official. But when you were going to be scrutinizing the other areas of their, let's call it their knowledge in fiqh, their knowledge on other areas, not all of them were necessarily at the same level. Khalid ibn al-Walid didn't actually memorize much of the Quran compared to probably Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was not necessarily this military leader, and certainly he was known to being a person that is quite short, a person that is quite small in his body buildup, but then he had a different type of leadership, and that is the leadership to basically, one, write the Quran, two, he also had, hey, the Prophet ﷺ actually said that he is going to be a scholar, so certainly he was a scholar. He was one of the most knowledgeable Sahaba. So you could see that there are a number of different things that in what makes a leader, and it doesn't they don't have to be at the same level of leadership. And certainly if a person is appointed to be a leader in particular matters, then they would have to have the knowledge within, let's call it within that jurisdiction. So what does that mean? If you're going to be a person, let's say working in, hey, you're a leader, you're a CEO, and you hold a company, and you're basically a leader in business. Well, in that situation, you would have to have the knowledge relating to halal and haram business and transactions. If you're going to be a military leader, then you would have to have the knowledge that relates to military, that relates to dealing with the different officers, dealing with different positions, etc. And certainly dealing with even at home, okay? This is important because most military officials, those are in military, you could see that I guess they're always trained not to smile and not to be their self, and that's the only way to get you the stamina, to get you the power, etc. This is so common. I see it all the time in people that are working in the military, except الشاذلي that he was in the military in Egypt. I was really fascinated by him. But anyhow, he was not at all like a military person, but he was a big military figure. Anyhow, same thing if you're talking about to be as, let's say, a therapist in marriage counseling, family counseling, then in that situation, you really have to take in consideration to get the ilm, to make sure that you are ruling and giving at least the perspectives that are backed up by Islam. So this is just an idea in terms of al-adl, and in terms of justice, and in terms of leadership, all right? So just to keep in mind that piece of it. And let's continue. تعدل بين الاثنين صدقة. So being in leadership, in a position to rule between two people, is even a type of contribution, or it's actually a type of sadaqah. So you don't want to just say, no, I don't want to judge between, I don't want to rule by this. No, it's, if you were to bring in justice, that's actually a contribution that you're contributing within the society. And it doesn't have to be a financial contribution, but even a good word, removing the different hostile relations, or at least the or even the animosity between people, and bringing in reconciliation between people, is a form of contribution in leadership, and also contribution in bringing in justice within the society. Let's see. So at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually talked about in an ayah, وَتِلْكَ الْقُرَى أَهْلَكْنَاهُمْ لَمَّا ظَلَمُوا. And he mentioned, and those cities or those villages, they were destructed when they had committed oppression. So, and of course, oppression is going to be the opposite of justice. So what is justice, and what is it based on? Let's go right here. We're just going to pinpoint a couple things. We're going to get to it, inshallah. Okay, the justice is basically based on 5 different categories. D standing for deen, N standing for nafs, A standing for aql. Don't worry, I'll explain each and every single one. I standing for ird, and M standing for mal. So what does that mean? So justice is going to be justice in deen, how you see the principle. There's no way that you could actually have justice if you don't recognize the foundation of what makes the principle of justice. Number 2, nafs. And the most important piece about justice is the preservation of people's lives. The individual's lives are actually preserved. Number 3 is the preservation of mental health. Number 4, the preservation of family, paternity, responsibilities, the rights, of course, and distribution, whether we're speaking about financial distribution, whether we're speaking about roles, we're speaking about contribution within the family, and so forth. Number 5, we're also talking about the wealth. Usually people would relate justice to only being in wealth. Well, that's too narrowed down, because justice extends farther than just wealth in how it is brought in or how it's distributed. Because wealth, yes, indeed, it's usually the place of dispute, because usually people recognize wealth, and it is definitely a lot more dealt with than ird. Ird is going to be designated in a specific area. It's in a specific corner, but mal, it's in each and every single corner, whether the way you deal with your family or whether the way you would deal with things that are relating to your mental health, or even relating to deen. Don't you give zakah? Isn't that relating to wealth? Don't you give sadaqah? That's the relating to wealth. So you could see wealth is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُحْضِرَتِ الْأَنفُسِ الشُّحَّ. People were actually created, and people, part of their, I guess, instinct, part of their guess of their makeup is that they are greedy. They are concerned about their own zone, and then when somebody else trespasses their zone, that's when they would recognize. The first thing that you would see most children learning is the word mine. It's mine. Want to keep it for myself. Do not transgress. And then they would learn that, hey, if somebody takes something from you, you're going to defend it. And then they'll defend it in different ways, whether it's defending through probably pushing away, maybe crying, or maybe literally fighting. So you could see, hey, it's the same type of personality even as grown adults. Some will just sob their victimization and how victims they are, and others will actually defend their rights and stand up to it, and others will actually use different means of diplomacy in order to get the other person to give them their rights. And that's the same thing even as grown-ups. You will have some will just go into sobbing and feeling like a victim, and others will say, wait a minute, we're going to put a line to this, because if this person is not going to be respecting my jurisdiction, then they're going to be continuing, and learns how to put a line to it. And oh boy, oh my God, I'm going to get into a different topic right now. Okay, so let's continue. فَكَأَيٍّ مِّن قَرْيَةٍ أَهْلَكْنَاهَا وَهِيَ ظَالِمَةٌ. Same thing in another ayah, that oppression and certainly injustice is one of the main reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had certainly destructed certain nations, really because they were abusive, because they did not abide by justice. And of course, what is going to be the result of injustice is basically oppression, whether on people's lives, and it becomes like a snowball in where people's lives are then attacked, people's wealth is also going to be attacked, and the list goes on and on. And of course, when we're speaking about justice, and of course, I don't know why he started out with justice with the minorities, because justice, I don't understand why you started out with minorities. So let's go with actually justice speaking about the times of dispute. Let's see, the Prophet ﷺ actually started, would actually mention, إِنَّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ عَلَى مَنَابِرَ مِن نُّورٍ. Those that would act in justice. المقسطين, so qa, sa, ta is the root. qa, sa, ta is the root. مقسط or مفعل in لغة عربية actually means the person to engage in qa, sa, ta, to engage in justice. So whenever you would have that verb in where it's starting with muqsit or muf'al, once it goes into that harmony, that would actually mean this is the person that does such a thing, that does what and contributes in justice. So those that would contribute to injustice and those that are just, they are basically sitting on pedestals made of light on the right of the Lord Almighty Ar-Rahman, and both of his hands are right. And in other words, what this is right there, we're not going to go into what is called anthropomorphization. We're not going to be getting into some kind of tajseem, because the hadith just says, well, they would be on the right side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're right there. The hadith says, and both of his hands are right. Well, does he have a hand? All of that, we're just going to leave it as is without going into anthropomorphization and saying, well, this actually means power, and giving some kind of a metaphorical interpretation. We're just going to leave it as is. Alladhina, who are al-muqsitin. So a semicolon, if I were to actually change this little comma right there, I would actually put it as a semicolon. Who are the muqsitin? Alladhina ya'diluna fi hukmihim wa ahlihim wa ma wallu. So who are they? Well, they're the people that would rule and be just in their ruling. And not only that, but even with their family, within their family. And they would not whatsoever, I want to look at this one because this word is extremely important. They would not be hesitant. This one is important. Why not be hesitant? Because to be in place of leadership requires some sort of determination. And that's why this is not to be a misogynist, but you would find more men leaders than women. Why? Well, you would find more men leaders than women for a number of reasons. Number one, is this even backed up by Quran or Sunnah, or is just your own anecdotal piece? No. You could see in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, مَا رَأَيْتُ مِنْ نَاقِصَةِ عَقْلٍ وَدِينٍ, that women are naqisatu aql, that they actually lack aql. Aql is not intellect. Aql is more determination. And aql and deen. In the deen was actually explained that they would pray less, they would fast less compared to their counterparts, the men. But this is not at all to be a misogynist, because this hadith is just being informative here. This is giving us this information and giving us this informative clause to tell us, well, there's a reality that is, one, their anatomy, in other words, within their brain, within their physical and their, of course, neurological structure, and even relationship with how that would be basically affecting, even when we're speaking about the relationship even with the world around them. And the same thing when you look at, for example, al-qawama. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Why? Because al-qawama is actually coming in from the word qama. And the word qama actually means to sit up, actually means to support, actually means to be in leadership, actually means to be in power. And you could see that the ayah was emphasizing that that was actually more in men and women. But wait a minute, are you going to say that men can be leaders? I can bring you somebody that is not a man and was actually brought about in the Quran to be a leader, and that is the Queen of Saba, or the Queen of Sheba. There we go. The Quran brings her up and basically mentions that she was a queen. But one thing about, the scholars of Tafseer, this one's rather strange. So the scholars of Tafsir, they actually debated whether the Quran was really praising her leadership, or whether the Quran was presenting the way that, just demonstrating what choices she had made, etc. And then the scholars went in a debate on whether yes, this proves that some women can be as strong as this queen. And other scholars, they said, well, she wasn't as strong as what many would think. Why? They said, well, she was not only having a majlis shura, or let's say these advisors, but she was constantly asking for advice. Then the scholars had, went into a debate. Well, does a strong leader necessarily entail that he doesn't advise and seek advice and or shura, and basically decides and makes the determination, makes a decision, and takes the rule? Well, eventually she said that. Then they'll go into all these debates on how we can philosophize exactly the story, and we could see so many different interesting arguments. So it'd be really interesting for us to kind of sit and go into these ayat. Maybe we'll get there once we get to that piece of it, inshallah. Anyhow, the other hadith that is probably, I would say, right now is very controversial, which is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا يفلح قوم ولوا أمرهم امرأة, that no group of people that would appoint a woman to be their leader is going to be successful. Now, here's the thing. This hadith is authentic, but the interpretation is not quite accurate. Why? Because there were almost 19 different opinions in regards to لا يفلح قوم ولا أمرهم امرأة, on whether that hadith was speaking about a particular situation in where when the king of Persia died, he didn't have an era after him, so the one that was only there to rule after him, he only had a daughter. He didn't have a son. So she later ruled after her father. And of course, that was the end when the Muslims actually defeated that dynasty. And that was the end of that dynasty. Some scholars regarded that was actually speaking about that particular dynasty, that particular Persian dynasty, and giving a prophecy that the Persian dynasty is going to basically end with this last queen. And basically, this is only to give a prophecy and not necessarily an Islamic ruling that we cannot appoint a woman to be in place of leadership. I'm not going to go over the 19 different opinions, okay? I'm just going to mention some of them. The second opinion actually said, well, this is for what is called al-wilaya al-amma, to mean, well, that a woman or women cannot be in place of leadership where it is basically leading in what is considered as public leadership. What we mean by public leadership, or a general authority, or the highest level of authority, is if we're talking about khalifa. So she can't be a khalifa, but then they went into details. Well, what about judge? What about be appointed to probably be an advisor? Because, hey, the Prophet ﷺ even had Salama during the time of al-Hudaybiyah. She basically directed the Prophet ﷺ to go out, not say a word, shave his head, and slaughter right there, when the Prophet ﷺ was bewildered with how the Sahaba had taken his word and they didn't act upon it. And she said, well, you go out and let them see you doing this, and they'll all do what you have just done. So some will actually take this action and say, well, here it is. There's Salama actually directing the Prophet ﷺ, and she was acting as an advisor. Some will also debate on whether that is exaggerated, that she was necessarily an advisor. That doesn't mean she was an advisor, but she gave an opinion, she gave a direction, and he applied it, and it doesn't mean she was holding some kind of a real political position, to put it to that level. And that's why when you look at sometimes people probably exaggerating even in terms of context, or probably they'll tell you Sayyidah Khadija was a businesswoman and would imagine her that she was basically like this millionaire and this businesswoman where she was conducting business, sitting with these guys and, with a paper and literally, kind of like what we would imagine a CEO would be doing. And certainly that wasn't the case. And certainly she wasn't considered the richest within the society. So she wasn't this millionaire. Yes, she did have her business. Well, exactly like you would have, a woman probably having her shop and investing in her business, but that doesn't mean that she was a high CEO of some sort. Well, that doesn't mean, can a woman actually be a high CEO of some sort? Absolutely. Then scholars actually had differences of opinions on how far can she be in terms of leadership, and can she be a judge, and can she actually judge? And then they went into differences of opinions. Can she be a judge in matters like marriage and family court, and can she be a judge on matters in let's say even criminal law? That one was probably the most controversial between scholars, criminal law. And then they went in details and considered that women are too emotional to handle these circumstances. They're too emotional. They can go into all these hormonal disruptions, or at least changes, and that's going to affect their rule and the way they rule and their authority, etc. So they went into details. Can we actually consider that all of those different interpretations are necessarily going to be the final thing? Well, if something has a foundation in Quran and Sunnah, certainly. So later those interpretations, some of them indeed were more anecdotal than actually based on studying. And when I say anecdotal, not based on what text says, this is definitely going to carry a lot of, let's say, cultural influence and traditional influences, and certainly their lifestyle, and not necessarily the text itself. So in that situation, of course, just making it right there, since we're women, many times it's like, okay, if a woman was capable of actually being in such positions, well, if she had the potential to do it, she had the potential to be in such a position and actually rule, then that's actually rare in men, let alone women. So if she had the potential, go ahead, go for it, to actually be a person to, I guess, advance the ummah, whether you're a male or a female. So this was something that, I guess, me as a girl that was somehow a feminist, okay, growing up as a feminist, that I know it sounds weird, but anyhow, الذين يعدون في حكمهم وأهلهم وما ولوا basically not hesitate in their rule, and be fastened, be determined, be strong, be deliberate, all right, in the rule, and don't be afraid, and are not afraid. Now, a couple of things to mention when we're speaking about akhlaq in Islam, okay? This is important. So when we're speaking about akhlaq, certainly there are those foundations of, well, what makes as the area to basically say ethical, what makes morality, what makes ethics. Okay, number one is knowing justice. There's no way that you can rule by justice unless you actually know what it is, because the definition of justice is not to be based on your own feelings. It's not, I define it this way. It's basically going back to the Quran and Sunnah. Going back to the Quran and Sunnah. So in order to understand justice and rule by justice, you certainly need to study fiqh. What is fiqh? Fiqh is basically the science of Islamic law. That's my favorite. That's my field. Okay, the science of Islamic law. And certainly when you're studying justice, but that's not enough to actually consider studying Islamic law, but you also have to endure some kind of patience, because definitely when you're going to be ruling, there's going to be the other person that's not going to be satisfied because they wanted you to rule in their benefit. They wanted you to rule in for what basically benefits them. And in that situation, you're going to have to be patient. You're going to have to be courageous. You're going to have to be courageous. Okay, how do you write this? Courageous. Sorry, I can't right now. Courageous. And you certainly have to have al-iffa. What is al-iffa? Al-iffa is basically, I don't want to say stamina. Al-iffa, satisfaction, but even satisfaction is not enough. So even when others would probably bribe you in different ways, it doesn't have to be direct bribery. They're probably inviting you over. I remember a number of different so-called Islamic banking would be inviting me as a VIP to join their sessions in certain areas, in certain what's it called, restaurants and etc., in order to basically, really not because they care about fiqh, but because they wanted to take a picture that, hey, there's this religious figure, there's this person that specialized in fiqh, basically supporting the cause of what we're doing. And yes, here's a picture with them that they were actually with us, and as if we were basically going over and making sure that their transactions are really Islamically met. And it's extremely important to keep in mind. Do not be a stone in where people are putting you as a checker, taking you into different areas in order to use and abuse you, and without you recognizing. And we could see that these things, I like this question. I'll get to you, Noura. Al-Iffa, of course, is basically to not accept different offerings in order to alter your judgment on justice. So even if people would offer you different things, that you would just basically stay on to what is halal, and you would not let go of justice because someone else is bribing you, whether directly or indirectly. You are courageous and you're standing up for it and not hesitant. Don't hesitate. Stand up for justice and don't hesitate because you are getting some kind of a political pressure, social pressure, financial pressure to basically give up on truth. And of course, you're going to endure some patience because you will be attacked. Now, here's a question Noura is asking. Didn't Umar ibn Khattab appoint a woman to monitor the marketplace? That's a very common question that people would ask, and her name is Shifa. Believe it or not, I know everybody wants to always bring it up and make it seem like she was this, I don't know, the head of the municipality. That is actually not proven in an authentic hadith. It is definitely widely spread, but this was not actually authentic. It's unfortunately a lot of times those that want to, I would say, give some, what is the word that I could use? Sometimes some will actually stand in trying to defend Islam. Islam doesn't need anybody to basically defend it using wrong evidence, but you will find a lot of times those that would be sitting in da'wah, those that would be giving khutbahs, trying to, I would say, play on women's emotions and speak about in response to feminism, and think that by bringing in these different evidences and bringing in such kind of rhetoric, that is defending Islam. When in reality, what this really caused is that many had actually misunderstood, and what we're really facing right now is a lot of times people actually thinking that, yes, I've got my evidence, and then they started creating a new narrative on Islam. So this hadith is not authentic. This hadith relating to Shifa is actually not authentic. And it's quite sad that at many times I would say, the most common probably defense presented is that even if a woman were to be working and getting income, that she basically does not have to contribute and does not even have to work at home, and her husband is basically supposed to be bringing in the income, and he's the one that's supposed to be working at home, and etc. And this is absolutely false. This is absolutely false to actually say it in that way. Sorry, I know it kind of feeds our, yes, exactly, I want to live like a queen, and he's going to be working, hire a maid for me, and even when I get a job outside, I don't have to contribute anything because the money is going to go in my bank account and it's going to be mine. Sorry, but that's not actually accurate. That's not accurate. You've got differences of opinions, almost 7 differences of opinions in that regards. So anyhow, just let you know, I'm not going to go in details in that regards, but it's really said that a lot of times I would say the lack of fiqh is making many, I would say, think that they're defending Islam when in reality they're actually bring in a wrong narrative, a wrong representation, and certainly confusion within the society. Well, confusion within the society, and now many women are actually right now not recognizing that are adopting feminism, and they're adopting feminism in a new, I would say, wrapper. A new wrapper. They'll put Islam on it, and it's really feminism on the inside. It's kind of like a halal pork. Allah al-Musta'an. It's the sad thing, and it's the sad funny thing, I guess. It's really, yeah, good thing, Nura, that you asked. Good job. All right. So why is it important to actually act in justice? Number one is that you basically would get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. وَأَقْسِطُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُقْسِطِينَ. So to be in a position where you're applying justice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically, you would be included in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's love. It basically leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's content over you. And certainly the position of being in leadership, the person in leadership is actually a rare thing. You don't often have people in leadership, and certainly the people in leadership are the most to have probably the influence on the society, whether the influence towards good or even influence towards evil. And of course, when you're bringing in such a contribution within the society, you're actually bringing in security in people's lives, people's, of course, families, in DNAIM, remember that one, people's wealth, and certainly you're bringing in peace within the society. But here's a question. When we're speaking about um, the different faces or phases of justice, are we talking about only one type of justice? So we're talking about not only in bringing in justice between people in dispute, but that's also when we're speaking about children, where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, "Ittaqullaha wa'dilu bayna abnaikum or awladikum." Have taqwa and apply justice in your relationship with your children. Let's see this one. The Prophet ﷺ had even warned in terms of wives, and of course in polygamous marriages, and even if we're talking about monogamous marriages as well, and where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And when you're doing ishra, in other words, you're living with them, you're dealing with them, the dynamics of your relationship within your marriage, it must be on the basis of ma'ruf. What is the basis of ma'ruf? On the basis of piety, on the basis of justice, and certainly the basis that what defines justice and piety, and many times it's basically the culture itself. The Prophet ﷺ, even in terms, of course, when we're speaking about justice in terms of marriage, all right, it's really important to mention that the Quran does bring forth that polygamous marriages are more susceptible to being abusive than monogamous marriages. No, are you there saying that polygamy is wrong? No, I'm not saying polygamy is wrong. I'm saying that the ayah, when it would tell you if we were to go into the ayat, and when the ayah would tell the man, directing to the man, وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةً, if you fear that you won't be just, then stay basically married to only one. That, why did it say وَإِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا? Because when it didn't say, and if you fear that you won't be lovable, or if you feel that you won't be romantic, or if you fear that you won't have enough money, and just like in another ayah for Shafi'i, he actually said that actually is interpreted, you don't have enough money. All right. So in khiftum alla ta'dilu fawahida would actually tell us that in polygamous marriages, they are more likely to be abusive. They are more likely to lack justice than monogamous marriages. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was emphasizing من كانت له امرأتان فمال إلى إحداهما جاء يوم القيامة وشقه مائل. Whoever had two wives and then he basically leaned towards one, and this is a metaphor to basically mean that the other one was probably neglected, but he basically was giving more privileges to one and not the other. On Judgment Day, he would basically come forth, of course, on Judgment Day, meaning resurrected, and he would come forth with one of his sides basically leaning towards one side. In other words, it becomes like a disability that they'll be facing. All right, so this is just to mention that one. And of course, there is also the justice with minorities. Let me speak about that justice with minorities, or the justice with the other, I don't want to say minorities to actually mean like, let's say, Christian minorities or Jewish minorities within the society. It's really sad that in certain countries, I had visited let's call it discrimination. Discrimination is just so obvious. So obvious. It is so appalling. Visiting the Gulf, I was extremely disgusted by the amount of injustice and discrimination there. Well, just because somebody is Bengali, they are to be looked down at. Somebody is Indian, looked down at. Somebody is Pakistani, looked down at and treated like they are nothing, that they don't even have the right. Just because somebody is Egyptian or Syrian, looked down at. This is extremely appalling to see that within the Muslim society, whether we're talking about Saudi Arabia, and it's really sad that this is not just exclusive to their countries, but they have been practicing that even when they move to a country like Malaysia, okay, they're still carrying that mentality in where if you're Bengali, yeah, you're a second-class citizen, not even recognizing that you're not even a citizen in Malaysia. It's it became so intertwined in their mind that such people are of less value, that they would actually treat such people in a way like they are nothing, like they are disgusting. It's really sad. This is not an Islamic akhlaq at all. In fact, when Abu Dhar, he called Bilal ibn Rabah, he called him the son of a black woman. Now, mind you, Bilal ibn Rabah wasn't 100% African. Bilal ibn Rabah actually had, well, an Arabic father, whether you want to consider Arabic as white or not. Regardless, they would consider themselves white, and of course, whatever. By the way, it's really funny that the Arab actually used to call what is considered a Caucasian race, they used to call them yellow, okay? And the Arab would consider themselves white, and they would consider the Africans black. It's really strange how they would, and it, like even people that had different eye colors, uh, like Ibn Jinni, he was actually called Ibn Jinni because the son of a jinn, all right, because he had green eyes. It's like, that's really strange. Must be some kind of a jinn related thing, or else what gives a good explanation why he's got green color eyes? It must be jinn related. You could see it's really funny. It was like Ibn Jinni. He was a scholar in Lugha Arabiya, but he was called Ibn Jinni because he had green eyes. Yeah, makes sense, right? And I find it strange. It's really strange how people can, it's kind of like what Shakespeare in his story, in his story. I forgot which one. Was it Hamlet? I forgot which story in Shakespeare, in where so he goes into the city and they all had their noses chopped off, and it was the common culture that was seen as this is beauty, and then basically felt, and when he came in with a complete nose, they started laughing at him because he had a complete nose. That's one of the Shakespeare stories, regardless, and I'm not going to go into Shakespeare. Okay. Now, one thing is that when you see such discrimination, it actually comes with injustice, and it comes and brings in arrogance. It brings in arrogance. And when you talk about arrogance, it actually results in oppression. But tawadu, humility, being humble. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Man tawada'a lillahi rafa'ah." Whoever would have that humility, whoever is humble, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would elevate them. They would think that arrogance is going to get them up high and people are going to see them as, yeah, somewhere up there. But in reality, it's just that fake position, that fake ego that you had put yourself as if you were a center, when in reality, you're really not nothing but at the very low end. And only those that would be in humility and those that would act in really, there's one thing I like about certain personalities. Just be yourself. Don't fake anything. Yes, to be yourself, it doesn't mean to not live akhlaq, but be yourself. Al-Arab used to hate التكلف. Don't fake prestige. Don't fake like you are some kind of a knowledgeable person, etc. At the end of the day, you're human. Having a degree and some kind of a university, PhD, whatever it is, it doesn't mean you're understanding. Having money, it doesn't mean that you're generous. Because generosity, understanding, beauty, all these different things, they're actually morals on the inside. Shallow people are the only ones that would think that what makes a position in the hearts of people is what you would have in materialism. Materialism doesn't make you. Materialism is separate of you. What makes you of a person that is worthy is really al-akhlaq, morality, ethics. That's what makes a person. What makes a person is really the way that they would build themselves on the inside. And that's not only with akhlaq only, or a position that you might hold in people's hearts. But that's the same thing when you're talking about happiness. Having money doesn't mean that you're actually happy, because happiness is on the inside. It's a feeling on the inside. And that's the same thing. When we're speaking about adl, the Prophet ﷺ said, أَلَا مَنْ ظَلَمَ مُعَاهَدًا, or mu'ahidan, this is wrong, أو انتقصه أو كلفه فوق طاقته أو أخذ منه شيئا بغير طيب نفس فأنا حجيجه يوم القيامة. Whoever oppresses mu'ahidan. Why is it saying mu'ahadan? Mu'ahad? No, it's mu'ahid. So whoever oppresses a person that has come in, whether it's an immigrant or whether this person came through a visa, whatever it is, or even to condescend them, or even give them chores more than what they could handle, or take something from them without them giving it to them with their own will, then on Judgment Day, the Prophet ﷺ would be the one to basically stand in opposition to them. And this is, of course, whether we're speaking about a person that's coming within your country, or whether that's somebody that is coming to work, or whether somebody that basically ended up finding a low-paying job. I mean, imagine in Qatar, these women would be working a full-time job for $280 a month. And I actually had talked to some of these women, and it's really sad. I mean, they told me that they would be living in these dorms where they could only have like a small, very small locker, almost 1 foot in size, and that's all their belongings. And then they would have this car coming over, taking them literally like slaves, and they would basically get dropped off, and their passports are taken away, and of course their rights for $280 a month. It is so appalling. It is so appalling. I mean, I remember talking to some of them, and one of them just started, she burst in tears, literally burst in tears. And she said, "Thank you for talking to me. Usually I don't get people talking to me. I would be treated like I'm nothing." It's like, hello, people. Hello, people. I mean, it's so appalling to see those countries treating these people that really the circumstance pushed them into those areas to work with such low-paying jobs. You think they actually wanted that, or was it the circumstance? Whatever happened to humanity? Whatever happened to caring? Whatever happened to respect? Whatever happened to giving people dignity? Allah musta'an. Sorry, every time I think about that, every time I think about that, I just want to, oh my God, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Allah musta'an. It's quite sad. Anyhow, so let's continue. Well, the question is, does justice actually mean total equity? The answer is no. It doesn't mean total equity. Why? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أهم يقسمون رحمة ربك نحن قسمنا بينهم معيشتهم في الحياة الدنيا ورفعنا بعضهم فوق بعض درجات ليتخذ بعضهم بعضا سخريا ورحمة ربك خير مما يجمعون. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says, are they the ones to distribute the mercy of your Lord Almighty? We had basically distributed, in other words, made these different distributions. Not all people are rich, and not all people are poor, and not all people would have to be necessarily at the same level of basically even income. So some of them would basically be working in probably high-paying jobs, or probably based on the scarcity or even the effort that was put in for that particular job. You would see a person that studies to basically become an engineer, or basically becomes a doctor, or whatever it is. You know, it's not the same type of effort that was contributed, whether it's the contribution within the society, or whether it's even the contribution to be at that position, is not going to be the same as probably somebody that learned how to probably become a tailor. It's not really the same thing. So it's not a communism, basically. All right, so this is just an idea. All right, that is not whatsoever to say that a person that is a tailor is supposed to be condescended or perceived as lower, but this is basically to say that this is normal. This is normal in having such, let's call them such levels, or such different levels in their rizq, or even different levels in what they would basically be getting in terms of fairness. Okay. ليتخذ بعضهم بعضا سخرية. So you would have, there's going to be definitely, there's some subordination. There's going to be definitely, some are going to be putting in a different contribution, and others that are going to be not having the same type of potential that would be basically, let's say, ruled by others. In other words, you've got certain groups that were given the potential of leadership, certain groups they're given the potential to probably become doctors, engineers, and whatever it is, and other people that basically are going to do other jobs, plumbing, I guess tailorship, or probably, do work in business in different areas. And in other words, at the end of the day, is that such potentials, they would, the word that they would basically take, sukhriya, would basically mean one is going to be needing the other. So even if you're a doctor, you definitely need a plumber, even though they would probably work at a different thing, but you would still need a plumber. You would still need maybe a person, a construction worker, whatever it is, even though in the society, they would see them as less paying jobs. But at the end of the day, your life depends on them. Your life depends on them, and their life depends on you as well. And in the end, وَرَحْمَةُ رَبِّكَ خَيْرٌ مِّمَّا يَجْمَعُونَ. And the mercy of your Lord Almighty is better than what they would collect. What is Rahmat Rabbik? How's that related to anything? Well, that's in order to tell you that, well, you also need to embrace the Lord Almighty's mercy and engage in this relationship in dealing with others, even if they are considered probably at a less or a lower status than you. Then embrace mercy and don't look down upon such people. And know that the highest value is not the money, but is actually the mercy. The highest value is the mercy. The highest value is the morals. The highest value is tawadu', is basically humility. The highest value is to gain justice. This is the highest value, even more than the money that you are actually right there probably so proud of. So of course, we still didn't get farther than justice, but we're still there. Inna Allah ni'imma ya'idhukum. So inna Allah, so here we just went into al-adl. Inna Allah ni'imma ya'idhukum bih. Ni'imma actually means that this is the highest virtue that the Lord Almighty ya'idhukum bih. In other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that when He orders you for justice, that's the highest virtue. And this virtue is not a virtue to claim, but it's a reminder for you to abide by. You can claim that you're just, but that doesn't mean that you really are so in practicing it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, ya'idhukum. Il-wa'd actually came in the Quran numerous times. Il-wa'd came in to really mean, it's a kind word, it's a kind reminder, it's basically to bring it to your attention. And you would see the word, maybe it would be interesting. Let's see, I'm going to go back to, and there are good apps, inshallah. I'll probably put them up there. Some of those good apps. I'm going to go back to the app and actually see the word wa'adha in the Quran, how many times it basically came in. No, give me all the rates. So it came in 25 times, wa'adha, just the word wa'adha. 25 times you actually would see the word wa'adha. Wa'adha actually means to bring in a kind reminder, and certainly this kind of reminder is basically to bring in kind of like taqwa. It's to bring in taqwa. And of course, when you're speaking about al-maw'idha, it's important, even if you have the ilm. Al-maw'idha is not exclusive to those that don't have ilm. الموعظة is also coming in. Let's see this one. Let's share this one to know what موعظة actually brings in. So you've got the root موعظة actually comes from the root وعظة. A person that's doing it is called wa'adh. The plural of it is wa'adh, meaning the plural of wa'adh. Okay. So what does a maw'idha entail? It entails to bring in fear. So you're basically telling the person that the consequence of not abiding, for example, in the context that we're doing, you're not abiding by justice, is the consequence is going to be scary, where it's going to be hellfire, or it's going to be people basically probably going against you, or etc. Or a zajr. A zajr is it's a form of instilling fear, but it's more of a warning. Okay, التذكير بالخير وما يرق له القلب ويلينه. التذكير بالخير, a good reminder instead of, people, not all people would be, I would say, maybe not provoked, but encouraged. With encouragement, it basically comes by reminding people of the good result of their behavior. But التخويف and الزجر would be to remind people of the bad result or the bad consequence of such a behavior. So you would want to do on two sides. You've got the Jannah and you've got the Nar, same thing. Even when you would tell your children, for example, hey, if you don't wash the dishes, the consequence is going to be you're going to be doing more dishes for the rest of the week, for example. If you were to do the dishes, I'll basically deduct days off work, or probably deduct some other chores, and consider that you were doing a great job in abiding by your chores and etc. So this is tadhkir bil khair. It's basically reminding you of a good consequence. And so al-wa'd is right there. So even when you want to do wa'd to your children, or wa'd to those are around you, brotherhood, sisterhood, etc., it's basically to give a good advice, and basically it's part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bil sabr, that they would remind one another of on truth, what it means to be just, and what it means to basically implement the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly what it means, tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bil sabr, what it means that, hey, it could be that you might be tempted and probably, tempted to probably not abide by justice, because you could see that there is a shortcut and cutting corners to get to probably a certain privilege. So in that situation, you would probably be tempted to probably just let go of the principle and just get to the reward. All right. So in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bil sabr, being patient in not cutting corners is important, because living and abiding by the principle is what a Muslim would do. So al-'idha and al-maw'idha is really relating to speaking to the heart. That's the most important thing. It's speaking to the heart. It's taking you in where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even said, قُلْ إِنَّمَا أَعِظُكُمْ بِوَاحِدَةٍ. And where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, well, I'm just here bringing you a maw'idha, bringing you a reminder, bringing you, it's just going to be that reminder. And at the end of the day is that you are going to be held accountable for what you do. And of course, the different ways, whether it's bringing in the different evidences, the rational argument, etc., are different ways to get to al-maw'idha. All right, so this is, I'm just, let's see, ضوابط al-maw'idha, okay, and in where, I'll just make the story short, I'm supposed to be ending right here, but inshallah, we just did one ayah really, right? But that's all right. And let's see. إن الله كان سميعا بصيرا. سميعا, why did he say سميعا? So the Lord Almighty is all hearing, all seeing. All hearing because in order to, of course, rule, there's going to be some communication done, some words said. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling you He's going to hear what you rule. is going to hear your words. He's going to basira, and really completely all seeing to see what exactly happened, even if somebody lies about it or somebody manipulates the evidence. At the end of the day, the Lord Almighty is all hearing, all seeing. In other words, you cannot run or hide from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or even manipulate the words, because he saw it all, he had heard it, he heard everything, and therefore even if the judge would rule in your, let's say, in your sake or for your benefit, that judge just judges and rules based on what they hear. The final judgment is really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if that judge didn't rule in your favor, remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be the one to rule by justice on Judgment Day. This is it, inshallah, for today. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. Any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. I got my laptop, well, not me, but it was really my son that got my laptop fixed. I guess no one has, wait a minute. I probably muted everyone. Okay, here you go. Yeah, now you can unmute yourselves if you want.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Walaikum
Dr.
assalam wa
Aysha,
rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
how are you?
Oh, alhamdulillah, doing great.
Alhamdulillah. I have a Pakistani lady here, Latifa Khan, and just want to introduce her to you.
My pleasure. I love Pakistanis and absolutely love their food.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
How are you, sister?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, doing great, alhamdulillah. Loving Malaysia and would love to meet more and more people. Alhamdulillah.
Oh, definitely. I've heard so much about you, so I can't wait to see you, inshallah.
This is definitely my pleasure, my dear. I can hear an American accent in the background. Am I right?
Oh, yes. We moved here 2 years ago.
Oh, great. Well, I guess you could probably show me around, because I'm looking for real milk. And if you
What
could
state
tell me-
did she move from?
Well, exactly.
I'm from Georgia.
Oh, I grew up in Georgia, in Atlanta.
There you go.
Oh, wow. SubhanAllah.
Farm.
Maybe you could show me off to those things, those items. My kids are really looking for good milk, and they had been, I don't think I weaned them from the milk in the US, and now they're really missing the milk in.
Oh, my. It took a while for us to, find the right one here, too. Because my kids were like, no, this doesn't taste right. And I was like, it's not artificial enough for you, But it took us a while, but alhamdulillah, we got it,
Yeah, so maybe you could show me off on certain products, because I'm still searching.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. It would be my pleasure, inshallah.
Allah yahfadak ya Rabbi. Allah yahfadak ya Rabbi. And it was a pleasure. Sister Latifah, inshallah, we'll be meeting in 1 won't we?
Oh, definitely. I have my
Inshallah.
Amara there and Rabia.
Mhm.
They're my friends. So definitely. They've told me so much about you. I think
Allah
it was
yahfadak.
Rabia, and then she had Hamara hooked. So now she's, and she's been telling me, and I was like, I really want to meet her. It's nice to see, meet people from back home and, just like reconnect, inshallah.
Allah yahfadak. My pleasure, certainly my pleasure. And jazakallah khairan, Sister Rabia, for bringing us together and bringing more and more people together. I love
Alhamdulillah.
meeting people.
Oh, yeah.
Yesterday I actually met a Chinese Muslim family.
Yes,
Oh,
there are
wow.
a lot of here. There are a lot of
Well,
Chinese.
you know
Muslims here.
what? One thing I felt that they were kind of skeptic. I basically, I'm somebody that will go and tap you and say, hey, I'd like to get to know you. Where are you from? So, but she was kind of skeptic, and she kind of backed off. And she was kind of like, I'm not sure I want to give you my number. And it's like, don't worry. But then later on, just talking to her kind of got her feeling that it's okay. But I think
yeah.
it's important to bring in, and I was really, really happy to know that one of the girls was actually studying Sharia at the Islamic University of Malaysia, which is really good. But I was really saddened that even when she would go to China, that she would not be capable of working with her degree. So I really want to know more about the situation that different Muslims are actually living around the world. Because if we don't actually know, then we're not going to be capable of providing that tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr.
Agreed.
Yes,
Agreed.
yes, yes.
Okay, people in here, you know, I have noticed I met a Chinese who came from, you know, where they have those concentration camps, subhanAllah.
Oh, the
And she was
Uyghurs?
telling me personal stories, yes, of
Wow.
how her parents have to act like they don't even live in the house in order to fast. SubhanAllah, I met her last year, and it just, I was like, so whatever we hear, whatever we see, like that's real and stuff. She's like, yeah, she's like, you know, that's why I am here, you know, and I'm trying to get my family here. And she even lived briefly in Pakistan, you know, just trying to bounce around and go to a Muslim country that will accept them, you know. But they are skeptical, you know, they are a bit scared, especially from where they come from. And culturally,
Right.
they're just like that. So they're not like us where they just like, hey, how are you? You know, just catch up and you just know my whole world. And, you know, like we
Mhm.
exchange numbers and we're besties. No, it takes them a while because they're scared in a way, you know?
Well, yeah, I guess they were living in a very policing country that,
Yes.
you know, they kind of blended in with their, I guess, culture, behavior,
And
and
fear, yeah.
they're afraid, you know, kind of like in Syria, they were always, you know, afraid to speak about politics. The second you would to ask about politics, they were like, oh, are they related to Bashar somehow?
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Right, right. I completely understand, But we definitely, you know, need to gather and make them feel welcome and learn from one another and get to know them, the situations that they're living in. Because if we don't, then we're really not bringing in that Muslim brotherhood and sisterhood together.
Agreed. Agreed. Agreed.
And by the way, Dr. Aysha she was a big advocate for what was going on and with the Uyghurs, with Burma, and oh, can I
Yeah,
ask
sorry,
my
sorry.
question?
Go ahead, Noda.
Okay, so I think maybe you told me this before, but so my husband, he said because we missed Aisha when we went for Taraweeh, and he said just go ahead and pray the 2 rakat they're praying for Taraweeh, and then pray like do the 2 and then pray 2 more, you know, like together.
Right. So let me explain it. When you actually miss Aisha, in other words, well, what I mean by miss Aisha, I miss the congregation for Aisha prayer. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Scholars actually had differences of opinions, and especially the Hanafis, and then they went into, can you actually have a different intention that is, of course, I guess, different than the intention that the Imam would actually have. So scholars had differences of opinions in that regards, but to make the story short, the preponderant is that, let's say you missed your Aisha congregation, you could actually join with the intention of a Aisha congregation, all right? And let's say they're praying Taraweeh, but you're actually praying Isha. So in that situation, when they would do and end their 2 rak'ahs of Taraweeh, you're basically not going to do this taslim, and you're going to continue your 2 other missing rak'ahs. So you could actually do that and actually
because I remember you said that you can't combine a fard and a sunnah.
So that was actually the Hanafi madhab.
Okay.
Okay, so for the
They were the ones that
Hanafi,
said that.
they're the ones that said that. So for the
Okay.
Hanafi, they regarded that the congregation, in order to really be a congregation, it would have to be that the Imam and those that are ma'mum, or those that are basically being led, that they're all supposed to be on the same page. But if one is actually leading with one intention and the other one is leading with another intention, they basically said, well, those are 2 different things. And plus, for the Hanafi, they regarded that an obligatory prayer is of a higher power, okay, quote unquote, than sunnah. And if a person were to pray, let's say, voluntary prayer like a tarawih, and for somebody to be in the back, basically of, you know, the tarawih is going to be of a lower power than a higher power, such as Salat al-Isha. So for the Hanafis, they regarded that, no, you can't actually have somebody of a lower power, let's say prayer like tarawih or voluntary prayer, actually lead somebody that is of a higher power, like an obligatory prayer. All right, so this is just
Okay.
this debate, but the majority actually regarded that, no, where did you get this higher power and lower power part? At the end of the day, is that you're praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not like of a higher power, it's higher power in terms of its obligation, but it doesn't mean that it has some kind of a power in where it's the majority completely rejected this whole idea of higher and a lower power, and
Okay.
yeah, and it completely rejected that, yes, because the imam is leading in such a prayer that the other one should not be in discrepancy with their intention. So they went into that. So, but the majority actually said that, no, you know, if there is a salah that is done in congregation and another person is coming in with a different intention, then that could happen. And well, what's the evidence? Where did you get this from? So the Prophet ﷺ, in certain hadith where they had already prayed their jama'ah, and then a man comes in, and the Prophet ﷺ actually said, who would want to donate for this man? Well, he wasn't talking about donate in terms of donating money, but donating to pray along to letting this man actually get the bonus of a jama'ah. And what was this? The man that was coming in was wanting to come in to pray doer or Aysha or a different prayer. All right.
Okay.
So in order to get them the bonus of a jama'ah, so the Prophet ﷺ was saying, well, who would want to give the bonus of a jama'ah and actually join this man in a congregation? So that actually means that the person that was joining in the congregation, first of all, the hadith didn't really mention on who was leading and who was being led. And that's number one. Number two, definitely their intentions were at odds. One was doing an obligatory prayer and the other one was doing a voluntary prayer for sure. Certainly, of course, it wasn't Asr, that's for sure, because Asr, you can't pray a voluntary prayer after Asr, but it's going to be either Dhuhr, or it's going to be Maghrib, or it's going to be Isha, but it can't be Fajr either.
Even the one where you enter the mosque, the Tahiyatul Masjid.
Tahiyatul Masjid, you can pray that after Asr. Yes, you
Okay.
can. Because,
Okay.
and of course, differences of opinions between scholars. We'll talk about that in the fiqh of worship, but differences of opinions between scholars on the prayers that have, let's call it a cause, or that basically the cause why you're praying Tahiyatul Masjid is basically because you're entering a masjid. So in that
Right.
situation, that's a cause related prayer. It's not just a two nafil just for the sake of two nafil. All right, you can pray two
Okay.
nafil or even more than two at any time, except after Fajr and except after Asr.
SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. And of course, except after, while sun is rising, and while sun is in the middle of the sky, and while sun is setting. That's it.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll see you all, inshallah, tomorrow. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And we'll also see our Pakistani friends tonight, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.